Good morning. Keith is gone. You're stuck with me for better or for worse this morning, I'm afraid. So I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak to you this morning. I believe this is probably the first time that I've spoke from the pulpit here at Jacksonville for a worship service, so I'm honored to be able to do that. I'm honored to be able to present you a lesson today, and I hope that you can learn something from it. If you learn something from it, that's all that matters, I guess. But I want you to think, when we get started here this morning, think for a moment about somebody who acts in one way, but in reality is something different. Maybe they appear to be one type of person in a certain setting, and then in another setting, they're not exactly the same person. Person who puts on a good front, but in secret, behind closed doors, they are in fact another way. Now, personally, what I think about is the way that Allison acts when she's here in front of y'all, and then the way that it is when we get home. But you may think about something different, and that's the thing where you ask 100 people. I'd say the number one answer on the board would be somebody who professes to be a Christian. Somebody who professes to be a Christian, but in actuality is the farthest thing from it. Somebody who professes to have the love of Christ within them, but in reality, that's not the way they live. Somebody who on Sunday and Wednesday is here in the building, and they look like they're doing everything right, but throughout the week, that's not the same person that's there throughout the week. Now, why would somebody act in this way? Why would somebody act in this kind of way? Why would somebody put on that kind of front? What would be the purpose of that? Romans chapter 16, verses 17 through 18. We'll begin there this morning. Romans chapter 16, brethren, mark them which cause divisions and offenses, contrary to the doctrine which ye have learned, and avoid them. For they that are such serve not our Lord Jesus Christ, but their own belly, and by good words and fair speeches deceive the hearts of the simple. There's no question that somebody who puts on this front, somebody who appears to be one way but in fact is another, somebody who isn't exactly who they say they are, that the heart and the intentions of these people are they're not to further spread the borders of the kingdom of Christ, but rather their own kingdom, rather their own personal interests or their own personal kingdom. We see here in verse number 18 what feeds their own belly. What feeds their bellies, though? Is it greed? Is it sin? Is it fame? Is it attention? Is it recognition? Is it some kind of status in society? Whatever it might be, the Bible is plain on what these people's impact is to the church and what their impact is to their fellow Christians. Now, we will see that in just a moment. We'll look at some verses to depict that in just a moment about what that shows and what the impact that is on the church. But Romans 16, verse 17 and 18 is really about something else as well. It's really also about marking those that cause divisions and marking those that do things contrary to Scripture and avoiding those folks. Why would you mark something? Why would you mark that? Just like you would mark X marks a spot, something like that. You mark something to know what it is. You mark something to know and to be able to spot that and to identify it, which is exactly what this says here. You got to mark these people so that you can identify them and so that you can avoid them. But consider how difficult it is to spot these things. It certainly would be easy to spot that kind of person, if they were here and they were blatantly doing something that was wrong, or if they were blatantly doing something that you and I both know is something that you should not be doing. But what if somebody was taking steps to conceal those actions? What if somebody took steps to conceal their true identity or to conceal their true light? How difficult it would be to spot that kind of person and to mark them. If I stood here in this pulpit this morning and I preached to you some kind of false doctrine, if I stood up here and I told you something that was just completely wrong, if I stood up here and I told you that this isn't worth the paper that it's written on, or that some other book is what we should follow, or that something else is out there, you all would run me out of here on an iron rail, right? You all would be out here, you'd be chasing me out of here with a broom. This wouldn't stand. It would be very easy for you all to mark me and to get rid of that. What if you say all the right things on Sunday and Wednesday, but maybe throughout the week you sow discord, you sow division, you do something that causes a brother to stumble? That's not such a quick matter. It's not as easy as running somebody out of here with a broom and chasing them out of the building. It's a little bit more difficult than that. Matthew chapter 7, verses 15 through 20. If you'll turn over there and read for a thought on that. Matthew chapter 7, 15 through 20, the Bible reads there, it says, "Beware of false prophets, which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. Ye shall know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes of thorns or figs of thistles? Even so, every good tree bringeth forth good fruit, but a corrupt tree bringeth forth evil fruit. A good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit, neither can a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. Every tree that bringeth not forth good fruit is hewn down and cast into the fire. Wherefore, by their fruits ye shall know them." Consider the teaching of Christ here, that these folks who were marking because they caused divisions, these folks that are not doing what's appropriate, these folks appear as wolves in sheep's clothing. Consider again how difficult that would be to pick out of that crowd. To Christ's audience here that he was teaching in Matthew chapter 7, that would have been a terrifying thought. Many of his audience, many of the people that heard Christ's teaching here in Matthew chapter 7, they would have had vast numbers of sheep. Sheep would have been something, hey, that you may not understand that here in Alabama. We're not exactly the sheep farming capital of the world. There's certainly some here. But you all are familiar with what a sheep is, right? In 1 Samuel, for example, there is somebody named Nabal that is said that he has 3,000 sheep. I want you to imagine that you're Nabal and that you have 3,000 sheep. If you had that many sheep, imagine how difficult that is to keep up with. Because if you've seen one sheep, you have seen them all. A regular old sheep, a plain white sheep, looks exactly the same as the next kind of sheep that you put next to it. Those sheep are indistinguishable. They are some of the most indistinguishable animals that exist in the world. They're also a herding animal. They're also like a huddling animal. If you ever see them, they're always in a group. They don't stray far from one another. If they do, they end up dead, usually is the way that works. But usually they stay very close to one another, and they stay pretty tightly compacted in one group. It's really difficult to count 3,000 of those things if they all look the same and they're all compressed into one group. So just imagine in that one group, that one wolf appears. One wolf appears, indistinguishable from the other sheep because it looks just like every other sheep that's out there. Does that wolf start by killing 40 other sheep? The shepherd probably sees that, right? If 40 sheep end up dead out in the middle of the huddle, then that probably raises some red flags. That probably raises some questions about what has happened. That surely would draw the attention of the shepherd. But what if that sheep kills one sheep? Is that hard to tell? Would the shepherd have their attention then? That might take a while. That might take a while for the shepherd to figure out that issue, that out of my 3,000 sheep, one has gone missing because of this wolf that is inwardly ravening as a sheep. Jesus' teaching on this matter is plain on regarding how to spot this wolf that has entered the flock of the sheep. Verse 20 says that you will know them by their fruits, that you will know them by their actions. Obviously, the action of the wolf is easy. It kills the sheep. You can see the wolf, it's got the sheep in its mouth, it's got the wolf has killed the sheep. You would know its action. Again, more difficult for us as Christians to see that. We as Christians, we have to possess enough knowledge and enough faith to not be as the sheep, to not just stand and be slaughtered by the wolf that's within our group. We as Christians have to stand ready and on our guard to be able to judge people by their fruits. Concept of these fruits are very simple. It's a very simple concept. It's something that we can easily understand, the example that Jesus is making. An apple tree. What kind of fruit does an apple tree bear? It bears apples. What kind of tree, what does a lemon tree bear? A lemon tree, it bears lemons. The fruit example is easy. But I'll give you another example. I'll give you another example that maybe, hopefully here in the South that you think about. Some of you I know are not from the South. If y'all don't get this, then maybe ask somebody what this means. Or if you're not old enough to get this example, then maybe you'll have to ask somebody. Which, of course, I'm not very old, so I guess if I get it, then probably everybody should get it. But when I was a kid, I used to love apples. I loved apples. I loved apples. Still love apples today. I want to eat apples. Like apple-flavored stuff, just as my favorite flavor of anything is apple. But my dad liked to play a prank on me. My dad loved to play pranks on me, loved to play tricks all the time on me. As a kid, knew that I loved apples. So one day we're out in the woods, and this happened on more than one occasion, I'm ashamed to admit. But he gave me a thing that looked a lot like an apple. It was green and it was round, and he said, hey, you ever eat? So as a kid, I might have been 8, 9, 10 years old. I don't really remember. I know that I'm still old enough that I can still taste this. When I bit down into that apple, it wasn't an apple. It was a green persimmon. Now, if you've ever ate into a green persimmon, that is the most bitter tasting thing you've ever bit into. It's like licking the end of a battery. It turns your whole mouth numb, just terrible, terrible taste. And I did that more than once. I'm ashamed to admit. I didn't learn my lesson the first time, but for me as a child, I just wasn't experienced enough to know that, hey, that ain't an apple. That is a persimmon. Now, as an adult, I might still fall trick to that. I might still fall to that trick, but I think I could figure out that it's an apple versus a persimmon in my experience now because I've done that more than once. But as a kid, I wasn't experienced enough to realize, hey, that is not an apple. That is not what this man says it is. Same for us as Christians. If we don't study our Bibles and we don't become experienced, we cannot distinguish the truth from unsound doctrine. Philippians chapter 1, verses 9 through 10. I want you to read there. In Philippians chapter 1, verses 9 through 10, it says, "And this I pray, that your love may abound yet more and more in knowledge and in all judgment, that ye may approve things that are excellent, that ye may be sincere and without offense till the day of Christ." Paul's prayer for the Philippians here in Philippians chapter 1 is the same prayer that we should have for ourselves today. Paul's prayer for the Philippians is that they have enough knowledge to approve things that are excellent. What it says there is excellent. Paul doesn't only want the Philippians to be able to discern between what is good and what is evil. He wants them to be able to discern between what is good and what is excellent. An example that I gave you of my dad and when I was a kid and him giving me that persimmon and he said, "Hey, Brady, this is a banana." He said, "I know you like bananas, but this is a banana." Now, I was stupid as a kid. There is no question about that. I did plenty of stupid stuff as a kid, but I was smart enough to say, that's not a banana. That's not yellow. That don't peel. That is not a banana. That is something else. Don't know what that is. But as a kid, for that apple versus a persimmon, those things look close enough that I couldn't easily distinguish those. Paul doesn't want these Philippians to be able to stop and say, well, you know the difference between a banana and a persimmon. You know the difference between good and evil. You need to be able to know the difference between what is good and what is excellent. If we as Christians, if we strive not to just settle for what is the difference between the knowledge of good and evil, but for the knowledge to even discern between that which is good and that which is excellent, we will be able to encounter any wolves in sheep's clothing that we deal with. We'll be able to spot those things and keep ourselves from perishing eternally at the hands of somebody who is inwardly a ravening wolf. I had Davey read Matthew chapter 7, verse 21 through 23. You know, we stopped right before we got there. We read 15 through 20, and I don't think it's a mistake that these verses follow. Matthew chapter 7, 21 through 23, it says, "Not everyone that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of my Father which is in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in thy name? And in thy name have cast out devils, and in thy name done many wonderful works? And then will I profess unto them, I never knew you, depart from me, ye that work iniquity." It's no mistake that Jesus goes to this thought immediately. After he talks about wolves in sheep's clothing and knowing people by their fruits, I don't think there's any mistake that Jesus goes to this thought almost immediately. Understand that Lord's teaching is that on the day of judgment, there will be those who stand before the Lord. There will be those who say, we prophesied in thy name. We cast out devils in thy name. We did many wonderful works in thy name, but what? Those works, those fruits that they bore, they weren't good enough. They were persimmons when they were supposed to be apples. Those things were not good enough. Those people who certainly professed the name of Christ, they ended up missing out on eternity because why? Because they failed to follow the will of the Father which is in heaven. This is why it's important for us. This is why it's important not only for us to be able to discern the difference between what is good and what is excellent, but we have to know the will of the Father if we expect to enter into the kingdom of heaven at the end of this life. And ultimately, we cannot expect to enter into the kingdom of heaven if we only act as a Christian on Sundays and on Wednesdays. James chapter 2, verse 17 through 26, if you'll turn over there. In James chapter 2, verse 17 through 26, the Bible reads, it says, "Even so faith, if it hath not works, is dead, being alone.